Welcome to the Psych Gym. I'm your trainer, Vanessa Perry, a former mental health therapist turned intuitive counselor. Much like a physical gym, in this space we'll aim to target specific psychological muscles and train them to be stronger. I'm so glad you are joining this gym. Let's hit the weights. Hello, y'all. Welcome back to the Psych Gym. I might sound a little funny. I'm not sure. My allergies are still acting up. I'm apparently allergic to Kentucky, but my body's going to need to figure this out because we're going to stay here. So yeah, one of my ears is blocked, so I can't really tell how loud I'm talking, and I really can't tell if my voice sounds the same. And as I started to record this, it started to thunder outside. So we're just having a good old time here. Anyway, none of that has anything to do with what we're talking about today. So let's just get into it. Today I decided to record this podcast about something that I think subconsciously keeps a lot of people from coming to therapy. And I say subconscious because I don't know that a lot of people have stepped in and said it right out loud. Sometimes they have. Most of the time I hear this when people are going on a spiritual journey, because sometimes people come to me because they know that I have been on a spiritual journey and they've seen a change in me from who I was since then. And so I think that brings this topic up for people. But also my clients that I see on counseling journeys for other reasons, this comes up for them too when things start to change and they start to change. There are a lot of people, myself included, that were committed to the story of who they are without really knowing who that person could have been or how that person came to be who we are, which I said that all messed up, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying, because I'm not going to go back and edit it. How about that? So I'm just going to go ahead and ask the question and get into it. Who are you without the trauma? Yeah. It sounds like a weird question, but also when you hear it, it'll give you a pause. You know, who am I without the trauma? Without what trauma? Which traumas? What do people look like if they don't have that trauma? I mean, that's what my brain does, because my brain loves a challenge and loves something to discover. So that's where I would go. It would be all over the place. But I think on a general sense, if somebody asks you, who are you without the trauma? You kind of think probably better, right? Like nobody wants to believe that their trauma is great. So we're kind of thinking, well, yeah, obviously I'd be better. But sometimes, honestly, it's terrifying because trauma doesn't just leave a scar on us. It does program us. Yikes. And sometimes we build our whole lives and personalities around it. And that's going to sound weird to hear right now, but hopefully you'll understand it a little bit as we get more into it. What happens though, when you decide that this trauma can no longer run the show and now you've got to change things? You have to. Let's talk a little bit about how the identity can be created though. Trauma doesn't just hurt us, it rewires us or wires us depending on when this trauma happened. Those that have had an attachment disorder or have an attachment disorder, this starts as wiring. It's not a rewiring because there was nothing there yet. It's when you're supposed to be learning safety and you don't learn safety because nobody is safe for you. The rewiring at that point would be safety. Now, if that trauma happened after, you had what felt like a safe connection to somebody, that's a rewiring from the trauma. But you did have some wiring in there prior. I don't know why I felt like I had to make that distinction, but there you go. It also teaches you who is safe, how to love, how to get love, when to speak up or when to stay quiet, and what parts of yourself are too much or too little. This is what trauma does to us, right? So those experiences that we have teach us who is safe, how you're supposed to get love or how you can get love or attention, how to stay quiet, how to people please, right? Trauma teaches us all this stuff. Over time, those things can become our identity in sneaky ways. You might describe yourself as the strong one or resilient or independent That's what I like. I used to like to say, I'm just really strong and independent. Like, girl, ain't nobody ever held you down. So you have to be the strong one. That's not necessarily true when there's somebody who makes you feel safe to not be the strong one. You're actually quite soft and able to be not strong. How about that? Along the same lines, you might be saying, I don't need anybody, or I'm the fixer. I just know how to read people. Can we talk about that one for 1 second? I just know how to read people. That is not always just intuition. That is so often a trauma response because you've had to read the people in your lives who had the ability to do something to you if you didn't. Right? So if you had a parent who was very moody and was abusive when they were in not a good mood, you learned how to read those moods. And y'all know this. You knew the footsteps, you knew how the door opened, you knew the huffing, you knew the facial expressions. These are trauma response readings. Y'all, this is not just, oh, hey, I caught your aura today and it felt a little bit off. No, these are scanning for threats type of reading people. I never get too close is another one. That used to be my runner. My runner had 1 foot in, 1 foot out because she was scared. Because again, people weren't holding her down, or eventually you knew that the other shoe was going to drop. So you might as well just be half in, half out. People let you down. People hurt you. People use your vulnerabilities against you. So you learn to not get close to people. You might think that you're an introvert, but you might actually just be protecting yourself because people haven't been safe. The people in your life haven't been safe. So yeah, like talk about sneaky. Again, that's what I said. This is sneaky. These things don't always come out as like super identities. Usually we see that with people who traumatize others, right? We can very clearly see like, hey, you were abused and so you became an abuser. We can very much see that their trauma created their identity. We're very clear on that. But all of these sneaky little things, all of these little people pleaser things, or all of these closed off energy things, these are also trauma responses that sometimes we will attribute as personality. But what if that's not who you are? Like any of those things that I just said. What if you like weren't actually that person and you are only that person because of your trauma? What if that's who you became just so you could stay safe or to get love or be alive even in some of these cases, which is extremely sad, but it's real? That is a disorienting realization, especially if you've built your relationships, your career, or your self-worth around those beliefs. And I'm right here with y'all. This is not me being like, oh, you people. It's me people too. Like who I became to stay safe, to earn love. Because y'all, I thought I had to earn love. Not who I am. It's who I had to be because of the trauma. But here's the hard truth, right? What trauma teaches us is not always what's true in our heart and souls. What? Vanessa, stop. During the healing process is usually how this crisis comes up. People will start to heal. And again, this is when people come to me for other reasons, this is usually how this happens. There are people that 100% will show up and say, I know that my trauma created this person and I am super ready to be a different person. Those people tend to not have as difficult a time changing because they're literally ready to burn it down and rebuild people, places, things. They don't care. This sneakier way is when it comes up kind of as a crisis. So healing means that you start catching yourself. You notice like panic in your chest when someone is kind to you, not when somebody's unkind to you, when somebody is kind to you, when you get a compliment and you're like, oh God, I don't know what to do. Sometimes we laugh that off, but when we're starting to heal and we're starting to talk about our self-worth and we're starting to say openly and out loud, hey, words of affirmation are my love language. And then somebody gives you words of affirmation and you are going to have a panic attack about it. You start to notice that and you're like, oh my God, like who I am and who I want to be are not the same person, obviously, because I said I wanted something and now I'm reacting negatively to it. Things will happen like you realizing you over explain everything so nobody misunderstands you, like preemptively. I'm still so guilty of this sometimes because I am afraid of conflict sometimes, especially when somebody means something to me. I'm like, I so don't want you to take this the wrong way. I don't, I just really want to communicate effectively, but then I over explain. And then honestly, the over explanation makes everything more convoluted. So, y'all, I get this one. I work on it myself a lot. And there are people who may or may not be listening to this that are like, yeah. I mean, I experienced that with you. And thank you for loving me through it. Sometimes you catch how often you shrink around people who don't know how to hold your full awesomeness. I don't know that this happens as much in my romantic relationships, I think. But yeah, these things happen, right? You just start catching yourself. You start to realize that self-awareness shows up and you're like, oh my God, there is a mismatch in what I think I want or who I think I am and who I feel like in this moment. When that starts to happen, that's when people start to feel lost and disoriented. They're like, I don't know who I am. I mean, countless times people have said in their healing journey, I don't know who I am. When this happened and I didn't react that way, it felt foreign and weird and I don't know who I am. Even if it was a good thing, even if they were like doing something positive, it was like, it's not me. Wild. I know this is wild, but you got to believe me. It's true. I watch it happen. And maybe you've experienced it, so you aren't doubting me. Again, here I go, over explaining. Let's move on. Sometimes you'll start to grieve things you didn't even know you missed. This is the sad part of when this crisis comes up. When people start to think about who they would have been without the trauma, they start to feel like, man, my life would have been so much easier. That version of you that felt beautiful and great and smart and courageous and ready to take on the world before the trauma, you may start to get like pissed, right? Like and grieving, anger is part of the grieving cycle. So pissed is part of it, right? Angry. Wow, this sucks. I spent 20 years of my life doing blah, and I could have been doing something else. The high horse syndrome comes in, right? If you don't know what the high horse syndrome is, it's something I made up of when we experience something and then we go back and trash the previous version of us who didn't know it like we were supposed to know it beforehand, even though we only know it because we went through something. So it's kind of like you didn't know the water was wet till you touched it, and then you were upset that you didn't think that the water was wet. And it's like, well, how would you know if you've never touched water? Weirdo, right? Like we love to do that. We love to get on our high horse and start beating the shit out of ourselves because we could have done something beforehand when clearly we couldn't have, or we would have. Acceptance, part of the grieving cycle. Anyway, sometimes one of the things that people grieve or get upset about is the tenderness that they had before those walls. Or if you can't remember that, just imagining who you would be without that trauma, right? Like the relationships you could have had, or, the friendships that you could have cultivated, or, the relationship with your children you could have had if you had tenderness that you just couldn't like gather up during those very hard first few years. The innocence that used to trust easier and not have to scan and analyze. People do that too. They feel lost and disoriented, but then they're like, well, like I really wish that I could have gone through life without all of this stress. I don't want to not trust people. I don't want to make people go through 100 trust tests in order for me to even be able to tell them about my childhood, right? Stuff like that. So, I mean, this is not all puppies and rainbows. We talk about this all the time, that healing is not always linear, but it is not always easy, and it doesn't always bring joy. It sometimes brings grief and sadness and upset and anger because of the unfairness that we feel in those moments of realization of, hey, I am like, it's my traumas in a trench coat walking around, not me. And that's not fair. And we're going to address that. Yes, that's not fair. But we're also going to do our radical acceptance and go, well, but it is what happened. And if I want to stay in that story for a little bit longer, I can, but eventually I have to move out of it. I can't stare at my wounds forever. I've got to bandage them up. Got to. If I want what I say I want, which is healing. And if you're in my space, that's what you want, right? And we'll get back. I had written this. See, I write these things and then I say stuff because I freestyle. But anyway, we're going to circle back, everybody's favorite, to the thing that I think maybe not nobody tells you, but a lot of people don't say it because it's just not sexy. Losing your trauma identity can feel like a death of sorts. When you stop identifying yourself with your trauma, and I'm not going to use the victim word because I don't feel like that fits, but in all the ways that our trauma affects us and how we go out into the world using it as a shield or as a reason or anything like that. When we drop that, it can feel like losing your best friend because that best friend was your protector for a really long time. Even if it was built on pain, it was still yours and it felt like it was you at one point. So letting go of it means engaging parts of you that you haven't met or haven't had a voice in years. It's really brave to do this and it's very uncomfortable, but it's where you find yourself, the real you. And that's who we're looking for. Who are you underneath it all? Who are you without the trauma? Again, now that we've heard some stories and heard some ways that it happens, let's revisit the question. Who are you without your trauma? You might not know, and of course you're not going to figure it out in a 10-minute podcast segment. That's okay. I know I didn't know, and there's still parts of me I'm discovering that are trauma identities in my own personal work. So there's no perfection part of this. There's no, I rebuilt myself and now everything is great. You just find bits and pieces along the way. But as you shift and as you change slowly, right? It's usually slowly, you'll feel better and it will be okay. And those little bumps in the road of just discovering new trauma identities feel less shocking because you've been there. It takes time and practice, and it doesn't usually come as a waterfall of change, which is good news because we can't handle too much at one time. Trust me when I say that, because sometimes when people are going through multiple changes, they're like, oh my God, I can't do any of this work. And I get it because it's a lot. So we do actually kind of want it to go a little bit slower. You might learn, though, as this is how the slow process happens. You're kind of learning about yourself and you're observing yourself and you're like, oh, I laugh a little bit more now. Or like, hey, I'm sleeping through the night, like a lot more than I used to. Or I don't know why I wrote this. I don't even want to say it out loud. You don't double check if somebody's mad at you when they go quiet. Yeah, we're moving on. You might realize that you're someone who likes a quiet morning. You might realize you are someone who doesn't always want to be needed. Hey, right, raising my hand. I used to think I wanted that. And then when I started to do this journey, and I was like, I like to be needed sometimes, but I don't always want to be needed. I don't want to use that part of me as my identity to draw people in because it exhausts me, right? And I need to have reciprocation in that. Sometimes you discover you don't want to really fix anybody anymore. You don't want any more projects of any kind, not just relationships, but you don't want to maybe in your family relationships or your friend, you have a friend who just seems to always be looking to you to help them. You might discover I think I'm done doing that. And you might realize that you are someone who is worthy of peace and joy, even if no one ever modeled it for you and you have no idea what it feels like. It's not just about getting over your trauma. It's about remembering who you were before it and becoming who you are beyond it. Let's be a little bit honest, or a little bit deeply more honest about that healing part, what it really looks like. It's not glamorous. It's far from it. It doesn't always come with clarity that's like, yeehaw. It often feels like a free fall and you don't know when you're going to hit the ground. Sometimes you miss your old patterns because they were predictable, which I know sounds wild, but it's a real thing. Sometimes you go back to what broke you just to feel something familiar. That one sucks, but I know personally it's a thing I've done. I mean, even recently for a very short split, I mean, the splittest of split seconds, I thought of doing it to see like what was there, but also because it was part of my identity. It was like, oh, you can't do that to people. You know, like that person's going to feel really bad if you don't do A, B, or C. And it was like, that is how my patterns sneak up and on me and bring me back to the familiar of feeling like it is my job to make everybody comfortable regardless of their circumstances, and especially if they created circumstances in their relationship with me. Right? Like I don't need to go back to any of that, and neither do you. And you don't have to go back to your old patterns just because it's really wild to feel like you don't know what to do. Oh, I'll just do this thing because it's easier. Like, no, yeah, I mean, you can. And I'm not saying that you're failing if you do that. It means you're human, right? That's part of the process. But what we're trying to do is really be aware of that and help ourselves not go back to that space. But, you know, who you are without the trauma usually is a little softer. And I know that if there's a man listening, they're like, fuck that. Because the men who come to see me are like, I'm a man's man. Right? A lot of times they do that. And I'm like, you can still like this isn't about turning you into something wildly that you're not, but being sensitive and knowing your feelings and things like that doesn't make you not tough. It makes you tougher actually. Because if you can't handle feelings, you're not that tough, honestly. I mean, I've said this before and I use that. I use that very often with people who decide to tell me that. Like, oh, well, that's how men are. Men are like, well, you're not very strong then. And it's, I don't have to say it very often, but I say it when I have a tough case in front of me. Like, okay, cool. If you can't handle like that and you're not allowed to cry, you can't let yourself cry. That feels pretty not strong to me. Feels like a strong person would let that happen and be like, what? What? To anybody who had a question about it. I know. And I know that the atmosphere out there isn't really safe for that. It feels like, but I trust me when I tell you, because I've watched people do it. I've watched everybody that I've sat down with do it. You find the spaces where it is safe and you do not end up in spaces where it's not. So you can be this person and you can thrive as this other version of you, softer, maybe cries easier. Someone who finally lets love in. Oh, God, all the way in, puts both feet in. I don't know what I'm talking about right now, but the more you heal, the more quiet it gets also inside sometimes. And that can be scary when you're used to chaos. You feel like you're like not on the ball or something. That happens to me, you know, like shouldn't there be something I'm worried about? Isn't there something I'm doing wrong or something I need to fix? But quiet is where contentment lives. And it's the best place to find the truth about yourself. When the chaos settles, you can let your intuition come through and you can learn how to follow the flow of your authentic feelings, not just quick reactions that usually come from trauma. So this is all part of that healing process of allowing this to be the way that it is, to allow ourselves to question, hey, is this how I really want to be seen? Is this how I really want to describe myself? Is this what I want to keep repeating for the rest of my life? And why would I not want to go through some temporary pain for that long-term goodness? Temporary pain. It is temporary, promise you. Because on the other side of it, you don't give a fuck, to be honest. You really don't. You're like, hey, if you don't like this, I don't care because I like this. So I don't really have a definitive answer of who are you without the trauma. I'd have to sit down with you individually. But I don't think anybody really needs like that, because it's not really a destination. It's a feeling. It's a feeling of you. It's hard to describe, and I can't really describe it much better than that. You just feel as certain of who you are as you did when you were that trauma-built person. Only you feel good. You have less of all of these trauma responses. You do feel really good. You feel safe and secure within yourself for the most part. Every time you choose rest instead of reactivity, when you show up with compassion instead of feeling like you have to control everything with nervous energy, every time you let somebody see you when it feels scary, you're answering that question of who you are without the trauma. You're rewriting that narrative about who you are now that you're not acting from trauma-programmed personality. So let's leave you with some nice little affirmations. You're allowed to exist without constantly justifying your safety. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to be someone gentler, freer, and whole, even if nobody understands it yet. Even if the version of you that they loved was one that's built on pain. It's sometimes hard on the people around us who want us to stay the same person. And I would never lie to you. There are going to be some different relationships with people in your life when you're doing this healing. Maybe not all of them, and maybe not super intensely, but it happens. But again, when you feel so sure and secure with yourself, and you feel that good, you put less emphasis on that being a negative thing, the people's reactions to your change. And the people around you who are celebrating your growth will drown out the ones that are upset with your growth. Like, really. I think about that. I think about, because I've grown and changed so much in my lifetime. There are people who maybe haven't seen me since high school who wouldn't recognize me as a person. And that's okay. Because there are people also that I've been friends with since second grade who have been through all the transitions with me, and they've celebrated everything that I've done, and vice versa. Even if it changed our relationships, because we care so much about each other, we want each other to be happy. And so those are the relationships I have always kept along with me. People who not just co-sign my bullshit, because that's not always healthy, but who they celebrate my changes. They celebrate my growth. They don't make it personal and say, hey, like just because you're A, B, or C doesn't mean you can't do whatever with me. It's like, yeah, it might, honestly, right? Like, I don't drink and dance on bars anymore. And so if that's the basis of our friendship, I guess that we can't be friends, because I'm not going to keep doing it so I can be your friend. That was a weird example, a true life example. But yeah, I feel good. So if there's somebody who feels that way about me, I no longer feel like I have to people please them. So yeah, it's worth it. Work is worth it. And that's why I put out a podcast like this, because I'm just trying to get information out there so people will feel comfortable with doing work like this, or at the very least feel like they are curious about it and maybe would want to try, because it's so worth it. I'm just trying to trick everybody into feeling better. It's just what I want. So if this hits somewhere deep today, let's just pause with it, sit with it, let it breathe. And if you want to explore it a little bit on your own, a good question to ask yourself might be, who will I become when I no longer need to survive? That feels like it's an easy way to start digging into that, because survival is usually where our trauma mechanisms are coming out because of survival. Even if it doesn't feel like we should be surviving that moment, that's what our brains and our trauma are telling us. And so that's why those things come out. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me be your guide today. Take care of yourself. Love ya. Thanks for listening. To learn more about what I do and how to work with me, head to thepsychgym.com to check it out. Keep lifting, y'all. It's worth it.